the next bit is the most important bit. That is this entire middle section. Now the middle section has several parts, several key crucial parts. I will start with the simplest, the one at the very top, the tank, your fuel tank. Your fuel tank ideally doesn't require much maintenance. It is ignored for the most part by most people, but it has two parts at the very top that are very important. You have where your ignition goes. On the design of the Tekken, you can see it's as if almost the ignition and the tank are more or less like one. And then just below the ignition is your fuel tank cap. Those two. If you have your WD-40, always make sure you're periodically, let's say after every 2 weeks, or if you're doing the math, after every 1,000 kilometers, spray some WD-40 where the key is going to keep those parts corrosion free, especially the top end of the fuel cap, especially the rate at which you apply WD-40 or even grease or even some little bit of oil on the fuel cap should increase when the rains begin. During the rainy season, if you're in the coast, make sure you do this as often as possible. As often as possible. That is your fuel cap and your ignition. WD-40 is your friend. It will keep corrosion away and it will keep those two parts long lasting for a very long time. The other part about your fuel tank is the bottom end of your fuel tank. If you're living within the coast region, you must check the bottom end of your fuel tank, especially when you're doing those quote-unquote would call major services, like at every 3,000 kilometers, at every 5,000 kilometers. Check the underside of your fuel tank. In most cases here in the coast, you get rust. Rust is dangerous. It's going to destroy your tank. It's going to start leaking. I've had to physically look at mine, sandpaper down several components and repaint it myself. Simple black spray can paint. Apply 3 coats. Perfect. You're done. That's it. The other component on the bottom end is your fuel tap. Your fuel tap is normally on the left bottom side of your fuel tank. It is difficult to get to because of the fairings that are there, but if you open the left side fairing, you can easily access your fuel tap. The fuel tap will be affected by corrosion and even also dirty fuel. Sometimes mechanics are going to open it, clean it up and close it back. That can be done periodically. It can be done every 5,000 kilometers or rather even every 10,000 kilometers. It's not a major issue, especially if you're living up in the highlands. If you're somewhere in the coast, check it as constantly as possible. That is your fuel tank. What comes under the fuel tank? Under the fuel tank is the nervous system of your motorcycle. That is your wiring. The Tekken wiring is, for lack of a better word, special or unique in its own way. Unique in its own way is that it's simplistic but also slightly complicated for some mechanics who may not fully understand it. It is not complicated. It's just that we found out as we went along that they used a different color code for several of the wires, and sometimes that gets mechanics mixed up. Now, how do you maintain your entire wiring system? What we've had ours done to is that the mechanic has removed the seat and the fuel tank, and the mechanic has to go through each and every single, it's painstaking. There is no other way around it. Each and every wire conduit, each and every one. Check where they are going, the terminals, where they connect to one terminal to the next, where the connectors end, where they start, check all of them. If there are any places that need insulation, insulate or even re-insulate. At the connectors, make sure you apply Vaseline or grease. Which grease? The blue one especially. The blue one is way better on all the connectors. Any connecting point, apply grease there. That will keep your Tekken problem free for a very long time. If you're going to be adding any other electrical components, be it your GPS, be it your aux lights, be it any other electrical component that requires power from your main wiring system, make sure you have a qualified, a good and experienced mechanic to do your wiring. Okay, that is the wiring system, the nervous system of your Tekken. It doesn't require much. It's basically insulation, re-insulation, grease on all the connectors. We move on to the lower end of the middle section. The middle section is like it's a myriad of several little components. So as we're walking our way down, we come across something referred to as the engine. Now the engine is not so much of an issue, especially from 0 mileage all the way to 40,000 kilometers. Yes, Lonsin made really good engines from 2022 to 2024. They are very long-lasting engines. They don't have much ado about nothing. The only thing you're doing for your engine, one, oil changes. Oil changes, the recommendation is if you're using a fairly thin oil every 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers. If you're using a thick oil, a more viscous oil, that is your 20W40, 20W50, thereabouts, 20W50, yes. If you're using a much more viscous oil, then the oil grade or the oil type or the manufacturer who made that oil helps you figure out how long to keep or the intervals of oil changing. For example, for us here in Kenya, if you come across an oil called Axela by Oryx, you can change that oil every 3,000 kilometers. It all comes down also to your own riding, can I say riding type, riding rate, you know. There are those ones who are doing city commutes a lot with slightly long distance rides on the weekends. And then there are those ones who are doing long distance rides very frequently. If you're doing long distance rides very frequently, then you need the highest grade oil, that is like Axela, Motul, such kinds of oils. If you're using any other lower grade oil, like the one we normally recommend is like Ola, then you have to change your oil every 2,000 kilometers. That is all you're doing with your engine. Now your engine has moving parts inside. One of the key moving parts is your clutch plates. My own experience, my own madness, I've only replaced the clutch plates once. For the 3 years I've owned this bike, and I replaced them just before 40,000 kilometers, and up to now I have not touched them again. Bike is still good. Ideally, you should replace your clutch plates every 15,000 kilometers. So if your bike has reached 15,000 kilometers, check your clutch plates. If they are still in good order, you don't need to replace them. If they are worn out, replace them. That is what you do. So every 15,000 kilometers, check your clutch plates. The ones with the Tekken last a very long time, but their wear and tear is determined by your riding skills. There are these people who are coming into riding and they don't practice enough, and you end up wearing out your clutch plates badly. You end up also destroying your gearbox badly. Before we continue on, your clutch plates, your gearbox, your engine longevity is going to be affected by the braking period of your engine. From 0 to 1,000 kilometers, you have to be gentle with your bike. These ones especially. These are not high-end bikes where you can just ride whatever speed you want from the shop. No. You have to be gentle. 60 to 80 kilometers per 80 is the maximum, basically, when you're doing braking in. You can jump to 100 if you want, but don't do that often, okay? Variate it, 60, 80, 60, 80, 100 once, until you change your oil at 1000. Then from 1000, variate it, 60 to 80 to 100, 80 to 100, 90, 90, 90. By the time you get to 2000, your engine will have been broken in quite properly. You begin to feel differences over 3000 kilometers. At 5000 kilometers, you begin to feel your engine come into its own and develop a particular character, okay? So breaking in your engine, again, will determine the longevity of your clutch plates and your gearbox and even the combustion cylinder, okay? So when you buy your new bike, if you're a newbie, don't just go racing. Don't just go looking for those top speeds. Yeah, you will kill your bike. Oh, you've been warned. We are done with the main components of inside the engine. The other one is your carburetor. Your carburetor is the lifeline to your engine. Your carburetor needs to be serviced every 2000 kilometers. Check it out, check it out, check it out. If it is still in good condition, make sure it's always cleaned out and those jets are flushed properly. You'll have a healthy carburetor for a long time. Same thing applies to your air filter. Your air filter, check it every single time to change oil. Check it every single time you go to change oil. We have two options that exist. You have your stock paper filter. You can be using that as often as you want, or like me, you can go crazy. You can use a sponge air filter. The sponge air filter, I bought mine from Bajaj Boxer. It fits there very well. Place it there. You can trim the edge a bit, but you just place it, close it up, works fine. We also have the fuel hoses. The fuel hoses coming from your fuel tap to your carburetor. Check them often. Rubber and petrol are not good friends. Check your fuel hoses every time you change oil. Every 1000 or every 2000 kilometers, check your fuel hoses. Replace them. There's no way around it. Replace them. The other part of the middle section that now translates into your movement is what I would call the drivetrain. The drivetrain is your entire gear set or sprocket set. That is the front sprocket, rear sprocket, and the chain itself. The stock chain is 50-50. Not so good. It doesn't last too long. At around 3000 kilometers, it begins developing sag too much. You have to keep doing a lot of chain tension every single time after 3000 kilometers. I recommend you can keep it for however long you want. I recommend you change your stock chain to a better heavy duty DID 520 chain after 3000 kilometers. Remove the old one. Your front sprocket and rear sprocket, those ones can be replaced at 5000 kilometers. Your mechanic will have a look at them. They'll be able to determine if they are seriously worn out. There are some other short videos. There are some other short videos I'll be showing on my TikTok and also YouTube shorts, showing you how to figure out if your sprockets are actually worn out, how to figure out if your chain needs replacement. You'll be seeing them. But ideally, every single time you go to change oil, check the front and rear sprockets. Check the front and rear sprockets. The next part we go to now is we're basically done with the middle section. Only what remains the middle section is your rear brake lever and also your gear shifter. Unless you fall and break them, those ones have no issues. That's it. Unless you fall and break them. Same thing applies to your foot pegs. Unless you fall, badly or have an accident, they break, they have no issues. The only thing you can do for the foot pegs especially is use your WD-40, spray those moving parts, lift them up and down, they move, they articulate. Spray that there to keep rust away, that's all. The rear end is your rear wheel and rim, same 17-inch, and your braking system. We have a master cylinder at the rear that controls your braking system. Always check the brake fluid there every single time you're changing your oil. So you're seeing the narrative here. Every single time you are changing your oil, these are the checks you're going to do. Brake fluid, front and rear. Open those master cylinders, check the levels. If the levels are still okay, fine. Check your brake pads, front and rear. If they have not worn out badly, fine. If you see they are getting worn out, start planning to change your brake pads. Number 3 is you're changing your oil. One thing I forgot to mention, comprehensive bolts and nuts check. What do I mean? Check all your nuts and bolts. Every single place is a nut and bolt. Open it, tension it. Open it, tension it. If it is loose, tension it. And so on and so forth, all around the bike. If you have any electrical components you've added, check their switches. Spray their switches with some WD-40 to keep them lasting you for a long time. Again, check your chain tension and check the condition of your drive sets, okay? When you're changing oil, there are a number of things you have to check every single time. But anyway, staying with the rear, it works the same way more or less as the front. The rear end also has a very important component, the monoshock, your rear suspension system that has a very sensitive undercarriage or underlinkage system. That system needs to be greased regularly. It can be greased every 5,000 kilometers ideally. That is what I would suggest. If you want to grease it more often, depending on your own riding intensity and rate, you can grease it more often. The rear monoshock, the lower end linkages, grease them. The top end side, also check it whether it is worn out or not, and also grease that section if it requires greasing. I've mentioned the rear rim and the hub, more or less the same as the front. The rim may also develop some wobbling. There's one you'll feel as you're riding on your back, you'll feel it. But ideally, every single time your mechanic or even you're changing oil, check the rear. Are the bearings worn out or not? The rear bearing number is 6302. If I'm mistaken, I'll correct, but it should be 6302. Replace it also when and if it needs replacing, and grease that entire area, same as the front. The spokes also need maintenance. If the rim has the wobbles, also go get your rims aligned. The rear end also comprises of your luggage system. Your luggage system has attachment points. Those attachment points get loose. It is not the best luggage system, especially the panniers. What I've done to mine is that I bolted them on. I bolted them on to the mounting rack. Why? I use them often. If you don't use them often, you can always keep them off the bike. If you're going on long rides, have them on. If you don't want to risk them falling off, if you're afraid of them falling off, get some bungee cords or some rope. Just tie them across. That's all. That's all you need. That's it, basically. The rear end also has your exhaust system and also some lighting system on the boxes. Check the connectors, grease them, make sure they're working properly. Always check your indicators, all the lights, make sure they're working properly also. The normal stock indicators are not bright enough, replace them. So, at the end of the day, if you have any maintenance issues, especially for the Tekken, ask in the comments. If you have any maintenance issues for other kinds of bikes, not above 400cc, I may not know what happens. I don't have experience maintaining larger bikes, larger displacement bikes. They're a bit more complicated. However, anything lower, ask in the comments. Other than that, that is simply how you maintain your Tekken and keep it running well for the longest time. Greasing, oiling, WD-40, nuts and bolts check, wiring checks, rims check, all that stuff. Sawa? Sawa.